crisis in Europe and elsewhere in the world confirms that while energy systems ought to have the environmental attribute of sustainability, they should not fail to also address other aspects like affordability and accessibility. In our conviction, climate strategies should always be comprehensive, balanced, inclusive, and equitable. Taking on strictly single or two-option strategies and moving towards a single source of energy breeds further unsustainability and energy poverty. Absolute disuse of fossil energy seems highly unlikely in the short and mid-run. That is why investing in and promoting the use of low-carbon fuels, such as natural gas, and systems with higher energy efficiency could play a more effective role in ensuring energy security as countries push forth with their sustainable development plans. Economic terrorism as an emerging phenomenon and resorting to it as an instrument of pressure constitute an emerging threat to sustainable development. Unjustifiable and unfair economic coercive measures that have been imposed upon my country have targeted the health and welfare of my citizens. Among others, such measures have seriously restricted access to and transfer of financial resources, new technologies, and essential means required to take effective national steps in mitigation and adaptation, as well as to improve on air quality. Additionally, unilateral, illegal sanctions stand in blatant contravention of global sustainable development agenda and the relevant multilateral agreements and have ramifications that stretch far beyond our national territory, hence contributing to global warming. In the face of such unlawful pressure, Iran, owing to the strive and perseverance of its young scientists, has managed to take important steps, thereby streaming development into a sustainable path to development. I should like to reiterate that our collective efforts ought to entail practical sustainable development that favors developing countries. In this regard, the Islamic Republic of Iran underscored the need for constructive and pragmatic cooperation within regional cooperation frameworks and adopted the required decisions during the regional, ministerial, and high-level meeting, which was convened on the 12th of July 2022 in Tehran. In this context, the Islamic Republic of Iran registers its readiness to continue its engagement in negotiating processes. Looking forward to implementing our common objective together for our planet Earth. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is now my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Fiama Naomi Matafa, Prime Minister of Samoa. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I extend sincere congratulations to you, Mr. President, on your assumption of the presidency of COP27 and on the work carried out so far. You have Samoa's full support in the successful execution of Egypt's mandate as the President. Mr. President, I have traveled thousands of miles across continents to be here. After a week in this beautiful and historic country, one has a tendency to ask oneself, are we in a better situation than we last met in Glasgow? Have we mustered the courage to make hard and bold decisions in the last few days towards considered actions to mark a positive conclusion for COP27? The optimism in us will it to be so, but reality is saying otherwise. We need to revisit the Glasgow Climate Pact, calling on a strategic presidential decision on sufficient implementation of the package. Samoa and all Pacific states are at the mercy of climate change, and our survival hangs in the rush of the climate hourglass. The major emitters poised for commitment are far too few in number, with lackluster ambition for decent climate action. Still, we welcome those that have set concrete timetables and targets, because the threat to our livelihoods, security, and well-being is ominously real. Mr. President, why is it not possible to apply the same level of urgency of action witnessed for the COVID-19 pandemic to the meeting of the 1.5 degree Celsius promise? The science is clear and irrefutable. We are off target in achieving the Paris Agreement goal. Our focus lies squarely on actions and more actions on the ground. Continuing on the current path means severe consequences for all humankind. We must upscale ambition on climate mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage, and climate finance. Support for climate adaptation measures is of the utmost urgency, and we encourage all countries to develop and upscale their nationally determined contributions to reflect this accordingly. Samoa submitted its enhanced NDCs in July of 2021 and launched its roadmap prioritizing 21 mitigation strategies, targeting high-emitting and important sectors such as energy, tourism, marine, forestry, and agriculture, to accelerate transition to a low-carbon and climate-resilient economy. Scaled-up adaptation efforts involved the development of 43 community integrated management plans, which collectively form the basis of Samoa's national adaptation plan that is community-based and driven. To address and mitigate impacts of climate change, Samoa is continuing its nationwide tree planting campaign, which started with the planting of 3 million trees from 2009 to 2020. Currently, a national campaign has begun to plant a further 3 million trees from 2022 to 2027 to significantly enhance carbon sequestration and carbon stock. We need everyone to walk that extra mile to determine and frame the future trajectory of our planet Earth. Mr. President, increased funding for mitigation and adaptation must be found to ensure achievement of the 1.5 degree Celsius target. Loss and damage must remain firmly on the table as we continue to witness increasing occurrences of severity of climate change impacts everywhere. Currently, the financial burden for loss and damage falls almost entirely on affected countries and not those most responsible for climate change. Arrangements for the Loss and Damage Response Fund must remain a priority for all. Additional finance is critical. The promised 100 billion floor for climate action can no longer be sidelined, as this amount is already inadequate for the challenges that lie ahead. Samoa welcomes the commitments announced by several developed countries to increase their climate finance and lead in the public climate finance domain. but it is time to concretize pledges and commitments already made, or we will be left with empty promises. We must also advance beyond current promised climate finance. And this is achievable if we are serious, committed, and united. Coal use and new coal power plants must end. Fossil fuel subsidies must be phased out and resources be redirected towards mitigation and adaptation efforts. It is not too late to make COP27 the adaptation and loss and damage COP. Mr. President, we note with apprehension the increase and frequency of natural disasters that continue to devastate countless lives, with Pakistan being the latest reminder. These environmental threats will worsen unless we commit to tangible and effective global actions. Past actions and responses have been fragmented, and the pace of action lacks urgency. Let us seize this moment to demonstrate our common humanity, our collective understanding of the challenges that we must confront together and act accordingly. We cannot afford the further erosion of trust between the developed and developing countries. Mr. President, we are alarmed by the crisis facing our ocean. Its health is under attack from ever-rising temperatures and acidification, marine pollution, ecosystem collapse, and rapid biodiversity loss. International efforts are desperately needed to reverse and improve the plight of our oceans and ecosystems. There is an inseparable bond between the ocean and the lives of our people. It is our home and a cornerstone of our culture and traditions. It provides a range of ecosystem services, anchors food security, nutrition, and decent jobs and livelihoods, protects biodiversity, provides means of maritime transportation, and form an important part of natural and common heritage. As ocean states, we firmly support placing ocean sustainability at the core of SDG 14 and ensure committed financing for ocean action. We must unite to prevent and eliminate marine pollution, including plastics, oil spills, discharge of waste, and nuclear contaminants. Plastic pollution is of serious concern. The magnitude of the crisis is such that we need to reduce, redesign, create demand for recycled content, and put basic infrastructure for collection in place. The Pacific SIDS contribute less than 1.3% of mismanaged plastics pollution in the oceans, in the world's ocean. Yet, we are grossly and disproportionately affected by its impacts. The Second World Ocean Assessment pointed out the highest quantity of floating plastics are found in the South Pacific subtropical Gaia. Mr. President, as the Blue Pacific continent, our islands are committed to fast-track the development of policies to ban the use of single-use plastic bags, plastic and styrofoam packaging. We welcome the decision to develop an internationally legally binding instrument on plastic pollution, including the marine environment, and building on the lessons learned from the BB&J process on both time and resourcing. As a global industry, shipping is responsible for 3% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Whilst progress has been achieved in effective environment management, a proactive approach is critical to ensuring sustainable practice. Hence, the resolution against shipping pollution, sponsored by the Republic of the Marshall Islands, must be supported. Samoa welcomes the call for protecting 30% of our global oceans by 2030 and commend the Blue Leaders 30 by 30 campaign. We believe that whilst this target is ambitious, it is achievable if we can well support it with finance, infrastructure, and innovation. Mr. President, sea level rise is of immediate and grave concern. It will impact adversely on food security and nutrition, including what we are entitled to exploit from our maritime zones. Samoa welcomes the ongoing work within UNCLOS and call for the urgent conclusion of negotiations on an internationally legally binding instrument on the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity in areas beyond national jurisdictions. Increased acidification of our ocean is already destroying entire reef ecosystems, which may never be recovered. Reef damage affects fish population, which in turn affect entire fisheries upon which we rely. This is a stark reminder of how interconnected the effects of climate change are with our environments and our daily lives. Population displacement, loss of sovereignty and statehood are consequences of climate change and sea level rise. And we must plan now for the inevitable. Mr. President, what must we do with great urgency? For our oceans, we must promote ocean governance, safeguard marine zones, protect BB&J, and eliminate pollution. Amongst the myriad of prioritized actions includes building resilience and reversing environmental degradation, taking ambitious actions to mitigate and adapt to climate change, addressing the risks of loss and damage, and supporting the sustainable management of natural resources. We must push for access to appropriate technology and to financing to enable developing countries to achieve net zero emissions before 2050. Mr. President, our borders have been closed since the advent of the COVID pandemic. All our Pacific SIDS have prioritized the safety and health of our people over economic considerations. Though a hard decision to take, many of us were able to keep COVID-19 at bay. We call on our development partners to collaborate with us in determining the best recovery strategy that fits our vulnerability and economic potential. Small island developing states simply cannot support their SDGs and at the same time fund core needs on their own. Development cooperation systems must be more responsive to the constantly changing realities and development emergencies we face daily. As the Secretary General strongly argued, no state should have to choose between rebuilding their economy and servicing their debt. Mr. President, small island developing states face complex development challenges that add to our structural vulnerabilities deriving from the smallness and remoteness of our markets and exposure to climate-related shocks. Most SIDS are not eligible for concessional financing once they are classified as middle or high-income countries. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated these structural vulnerabilities and compounded risks. Consequently, the call for an endorsement of a multidimensional vulnerability index will allow for the inclusion of more than just income-based criteria to assess eligibility for concessional finance. This will support SIDS in addressing their high debt burdens, overcome economic shocks, and simultaneously safeguard the progress made on the 2030 Agenda, Paris Agreement, and the Samoa pathway. Mr. President, Samoa appeals to all our partners to work with us in realizing the timely and effective implementation of the MVI. Fellow leaders, in the coming days of COP27, as it draws to an end, we have a chance to demonstrate our collective leadership and solidarity to urgent decisions to address outstanding matters before us. Let us make COP27 the turning point in our efforts to once and for all make the rhetoric history and the mirages real. Commitment to concrete action now and elevated ambition can save our planet for future generations. We can avoid a climate catastrophe in our children's lifetime. I thank you.
I thank Her Excellency. I would like to remind representatives of the actions in place to ensure effective time management, namely the 3-minute time limit for statements during the high-level segment. Full text of official statements will be made available on the UNFCCC website. It is now my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Marian Jurečka, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of the Environment of the Czech Republic, and His Excellency Mr. Franz Timmermans, Executive Vice President of the European Commission. Your Excellencies, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Ministers, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, let me first express my thanks to the Egyptian Presidency, His Excellency Sameh Shmikri and his team for hosting this landmark international climate conference. It is really important that after adoption, the whole set of rules to implement the Paris Agreement, we have now turned our joint efforts to the implementation of commitments adopted at past climate conference, in particular in Glasgow conference last year. The latest reports of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change bring clear evidence of advancing detrimental impacts of climate change. Regardless of country or region we come from, we are already confronted with them in our everyday lives. The signs tell us that the situation is urgent and we must act now. Despite we have collectively taken many measures, these are still not sufficient. We must continue working and speed up international efforts to mitigate the detrimental climate effects and enhance adaptation to climate change. The Czech Republic, as member of the European Union, understands the fact the energy and security crisis we are currently facing cannot be an excuse for neglecting the climate crisis. As the EU and its member states, we are jointly committed to raise our climate ambition to reduce the emissions of greenhouse gases, be at less 55% by 2030, and to reach climate neutrality by 2050. Securing this goal requires a complex of fundamental measures in transforming the way we produce and use energy, addressing economic and social implementations, and deploying innovative technology. In the EU, we are working hard on the Fit for 55 package that translates our Paris Agreement commitment into binding laws. Recently, we reached important agreement within the EU on 3 pieces of legislation that introduce new targets for emissions cuts in sectors such as buildings, road transport, agriculture, on waste, CO2 emission for new cars, land use change, and forestry. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the negotiation at expert level last week showed that finding solution requires mutual understanding of problems and interest of our partners. Now we, as ministers, must build on the hard work of our experts and repeat the success from Glasgow by a new success from Sharm el-Sheikh. Only that way we can keep our Paris objective alive and real. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Minister Jurečka. Dear President, colleagues, dear friends, the European Union is here to move forward, not backwards. Glasgow gave us sound foundations. Here in Sharm el-Sheikh, we want to set out a path forward. In Glasgow, all of us fought hard to keep 1.5 alive. We now need to implement these plans and help each other to do so. This is the implementation COP. The President has said it many times. It is now time to deliver. In the European Union, we are delivering. Step by step, the European Green Deal is put into action. We have committed to cut our emissions by at least 55% by 2030. The target puts us on track for 1.5. In the past 2 weeks, we have already agreed 3 of the pieces of domestic legislation to get this done. We agreed how to share emission cuts among our member states, to boost our carbon sinks, and to phase out CO2 emitting cars. We're firmly on track to finalize all legislation to deliver our climate target by the end of this year. The current state of play will bring the actual emissions reductions to at least 57%. So I am happy to announce here today that the EU stands ready to update our NDC, reflecting this higher ambition. So don't let anybody tell you, here or outside, that the EU is backtracking. Don't let them tell you that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is killing the European Green Deal, that we are in a dash for gas. No, Europe is staying the course. Actually, we're even accelerating. We are saving more energy, investing more in renewables than ever before. Russia's war against Ukraine will end. Ukraine will rise and prosper. The European Green Deal will succeed. The climate crisis is ravaging our planet every day. We need to step up our act. We need to work faster on adaptation. The EU is ready to make progress on the global goal on adaptation. We are ready to address loss and damage, because too many countries cannot shoulder the climate crisis on their own. We need to close the gap on climate finance, including by collectively doubling adaptation finance. Parties that have not delivered need to take responsibility and need to deliver. We need to work with multilateral banks to get the shift of the trillions going. The EU is committed to taking concrete measures to address the gap in loss and damage, including new funding arrangements. But we need to trust each other, launch a well-designed process so that we can end with the best possible result, with the highest benefits and the most value to those that need it most. Tackling climate change will always require multiple solutions, tailored to specific needs. We know that there is no one-size-fits-all response. I hope we can acknowledge this early on and give ourselves the freedom to move forward without trying to answer every question now. Let us build a Sharm el-Sheikh process that takes all of us forward. Thank you.
I thank their Excellencies, and it is now my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Elion Nodweo, Minister of Environment, Sustainable Development and Ecological Transition of Senegal, who will be speaking on behalf of the Least Developed Countries Group. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup. Monsieur.
Thank you very much. President of COP27, Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Please allow me at the outset to extend my sincere thanks to the people and government of Egypt for their excellent organization of this COP. I would also like to extend my thanks to the Executive Secretary of the convention for all the arrangements made to make our work easier. 7 years ago, the Paris Accord was signed with the hope that climate action would meet the target set. We hope to contain temperature increase to 2 or even 1.5 degrees centigrade, but the lack of ambition in implementing nationally determined contributions brings us dangerously close to exceeding that target. In this context, developing countries facing the brunt of climate change are facing an existential threat as well. Every day, we move further away from the 1.5 degree target. Greenhouse gas emissions, if they continue on their current pathway, will not allow us to achieve that. We must provide some reassurance to the millions of people watching us with strong decisions. We must move swiftly to a just transition which ensures ecosystem resilience and also the resilience of the most vulnerable communities. It's difficult, but it's not impossible. Our generation should have the courage and wisdom to change the course of history so that we pass on a livable, a habitable planet to future generations. We see that extreme weather events are becoming more and more frequent. They expose hundreds of millions to food insecurity or compel them to leave their places of residence. So we at Sharm el-Sheikh must address loss and damage caused by climate change. We must get the Santiago network up and running and define better the Warsaw implementation mechanism for loss and damage. Developing countries need better access to funding so that we can develop low-carbon economies and ones which are resilient to climate change. So we need additional funding in the form of subsidies. Adaptation funds must be doubled as promised at Glasgow. there must be $40 billion available by 2025 so that we can continue with our work on adaptation and mitigation. The Framework Convention has been in existence for 30 years. Over that time, we've faced many disappointments. There's been a lack of leadership and ambition in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. That's particularly worrying. This disappointment also extends to the promise of $100 billion a year. But this has never been mobilized in a transparent fashion. So this COP is our chance to put the multilateral process at the heart of world action once again and to improve its image again. We must have proper funding and a clear agenda. We must change the 30 years of promises into actions so that COP27 becomes the catalyst for implementing the Paris Agreement. We must leave the COP27 with revitalized ambition. We must have a fraternal climate which will help the well-being of all persons for a better conserved planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is now my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Tanzila Kamaranova Narieva, Chairperson of the Senate of the Republic of Uzbekistan. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
President, distinguished heads of delegation, ladies and gentlemen, may I express sincere greetings to all the participants in this summit and express gratitude to the organizers, in particular the President of COP27, the Foreign Minister of Egypt, Mr. Shukri, and the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, for inviting us to take part in this important event. We highly commend the efforts and initiatives of the international community to combat the problem of climate change. We are convinced that it is only by joint efforts, by pooling those efforts, that we will be able to tackle this unprecedented challenge of our time. The consequences of climate change are being acutely experienced in Central Asia as well. In our region, the growth in mean annual temperatures, air temperatures, is exceeding twofold the global rates of warming. Climate change is accompanied by an increase in extreme weather events, water shortages, a growth in the number of dust storms, soil salinity, the formulation of mud floods, and more frequent drought. Our region is also having to deal with the adverse effects of the evaporation of the Aral Sea, which is an environmental disaster on a global scale. Uzbekistan's main aim in these circumstances is to achieve economic progress while taking into account the need to reduce the level of greenhouse gas emissions and achieving climate sustainability through integration of the principles of the green economy in our structural reforms. And our priority in this area has been low carbon development and energy efficiency in all economic sectors, and introduction of efficient and ecologically clean technologies. Heads of delegation, Uzbekistan reaffirms its commitments to reduce per capita greenhouse gas emissions by 35% by 2030 under the Paris Agreement. To achieve these goals, on the initiative of the Republic's president, we've begun the implementation of large-scale programs to introduce renewable energy sources. By 2026, we are planning to increase the share of green power generation to 8,000 megawatts, which will make it possible to reduce carbon dioxide emissions by 5 million tons. By 2030, the economy's energy efficiency is planned to be increased twofold, and the share of renewable energy should be at least 25%. We've adopted a nationwide project called Yashil Makon in Uzbek, the Green Space, which plans for annual planting of 200 million trees and bushes, as a result of which the surface area of greenery in our cities will increase from 8% today to 30%. And for efficient use of water resources, we are carrying out large-scale reforms in the country using water-conserving technologies. Uzbekistan is taking decisive steps to resolve problems related to the RLC crisis. Over the last 5 years, more than 1.7 million units of forest have been planted in the dried out bottom of the RLC. And by 2026, this indicator will be increased to 2.5 million hectares, or 80% of the territory. And by a UN General Assembly resolution, the region of the RLC has been declared as a zone of environmental innovation and technology, and we hope to see active participation by partners in the UN Multi-Partner Human Security Trust Fund for the Aral region. Distinguished colleagues, Uzbekistan is ready for active cooperation with the international community in order to ensure safe and sustainable development and the building of a climate-stable future. We have proposed creating a regional climate council, which will make it possible to increase the effectiveness of cooperation in progressing projects on climate adaptation, combating desertification and land degradation, and introduction of water-conserving technologies. Thank you for your attention.
I thank Her Excellency and now welcome His Excellency Mr. Fardat Silba Arsha, Minister of Natural Resources and Environment of Thailand. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, a very good morning and Swadee Krap. First of all, allow me to begin by congratulating the government of Egypt as they take on the role of COP27 presidency and extend our sincere appreciation for the hosting of the conference here in spectacular Sharm el-Sheikh. Thailand strongly believes that as the world convenes here in Egypt, we will have a progressive and successful COP. Mr. President, since COP26, Thailand has walked the talk, turning words into actions. We arrive at COP27 with our revised LT-LED with 2050 carbon neutrality and 2065 net zero emission target, as well as an enhanced NDC aiming to reduce 40% of our emission by 2030, of course with international support. Thailand is in the fight against adverse impacts of climate change, just like the rest of the world. The sufficiency economy philosophy pioneered by His late Majesty King Rama IX has been the core guiding principle of the development of our National Adaptation Plan, particularly to promote climate-resilient communities. And moreover, Thailand is actively promoting the bio-circular green economic model. And as a host of APEC, we are optimistic that the Bangkok goals on BCG economy will be the key outcome that helps to synergize cooperation for sustainable growth, climate action, biodiversity conservation, and waste management. We aim to increase the production of zero-emission vehicles to 30% by 2030. The shares of renewables in electricity generation by at least 50% by 2050, and support the commercialization of carbon dioxide removal technologies before 2040. We are also promoting substitutions in cement and cooling industries and piloting on alternative rice farming technique. We also aim to increase our forest area to 55% to boost our carbon sink by 2037. And meanwhile, to explore the cooperative approaches, Thailand has prepared the national guidelines and mechanisms on carbon credit management. And we are one of the world's first countries to practice ITMOs under the Article 6.2 of the Paris Agreement. Mr. President, Thailand firmly believes that we have gathered here to do more than just talk. We need actions on all fronts, and we do need it now. And I truly believe in humanity to consciously and collectively define our future. I am confident that working together, we will be able to fight against this common enemy we ourselves created. And only together, ladies and gentlemen, shall the impossible become possible. Thank you very much. Khop kun krap.
I thank Your Excellency and would like now to welcome Her Excellency Mrs. Bonkam Vorashiet, Minister of Natural Resources and Environment of the Lao People's Democratic Republic. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, on behalf of the delegations of Lao PDR, I would like to express our sincere appreciation to the government of Arab Republic of Egypt for its able presidency and excellent hosting of this meaningful COP27. Mr. President, having recognized the importance of combating climate change, the government of Lao PDR has been working attentively with relevant international organizations, development partners, and all relevant stakeholders, including young generation, to develop informed and sound climate change policies, including updated national climate change strategy towards 2030, updated national determined contribution 21 to 25, and mainstreaming climate change adaptation and mitigations measures into financing strategy for the 9th National Socio-Economic Development Plans 21 to 2025. Currently, we are working on forestry carbon sequestration, clean energy, clean industry, electric mobility, circular economy, and carbon financing instruments. All of these strategy and action could help Lao PDR to pursue its path to decouple greenhouse gas emissions from economic growth and to achieve net zero emission by 2050. To this end, there is pressing need for adequate financial resources, technical support, for gaining access to climate finance and other sources of funding to support our country as LDC, LLDC, to achieve development goals and commitment made under the Paris Agreement. In this regard, we call for living a political view copies with concrete outcome of measures taken by international community during this COP27 to preserve our only one planet for our generation to come. At the same time, I call upon other development partners and donor countries to fulfill their commitments to good faith in this regard. Mr. President, let me conclude by reaffirming the government of Lao PDR firm commitment to the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development to combating climate change. Take this opportunity, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude and appreciation to their international community for continued support and assistance to the Lao PDR for our efforts towards climate change adaptation and mitigation. Thank you. ขอบใจหลาย
I thank Her Excellency and would like now to welcome Her Excellency Mrs. Josephine Napon Cosmos Ngoya, Minister of Environment and Forestry of South Sudan. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, honorable ministers, heads of delegation, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. On the outset, I would like to take this opportunity to convey to you the greetings and well wishes of the President of the Republic of South Sudan, Salva Kiir Mayardit, who is unable to attend this COP because of some pressing issues back home. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the people and government of Egypt for the excellent hospitality accorded to my delegation. Mr. President, though with negligible emissions, the climate crisis is worsening in my country, South Sudan. 8 out of 10 states in South Sudan are currently flooded, and over 2 million people are internally displaced and have lost their livelihoods. Besides the flooding, droughts, excessive heat waves, haphazard rain patterns have resulted in crop failure, thus impacting the livelihoods of our people. Over 60% of our people are now categorized as food insecure. Therefore, life-saving interventions are needed urgently. Hence, the prospect of climate-induced displacement and climate refugees will become a new normal. To address the impacts of climate change, environmental degradation, biodiversity loss, and pollution, South Sudan, besides its ambitious second nationally determined contributions, NDC, and its first national adaptation plan, and the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, is currently developing a cost-effective nature-based solutions to address the recurring droughts, floods, land degradation, deforestation, crop failure, and biodiversity loss. Mr. President, our environment requires us to change our attitudes and embark on ambitious nature-based solutions by actively protecting, sustainably managing, and restoring degraded ecosystems that are source of our food, water, energy, wealth, and livelihoods. As a region most affected by the impacts of climate change, South Sudan would like to underscore the importance of adaptation. A balance between mitigation and adaptation has to be adapted. Therefore, 50% of the funds raised has to be earmarked for adaptation projects. On climate finance, South Sudan believes that the $100 billion that was arbitrarily set is no longer sufficient. This amount is to be revised upwards. We therefore appeal to the developed countries to fulfill their pledges and to avail the necessary funds for adaptation projects. On the emission gaps, it is abundantly clear that we are falling behind to limit the warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. We therefore appeal to all parties that have not submitted their NDCs to do so urgently for the developed countries' parties to drastically cut their emissions such that we keep the 1.5 degrees and goal alive. On loss and damage, South Sudan would like to see into it that all outstanding issues regarding the establishment of the loss and damage fund are to be resolved in this COP. Last but not least, I wish to affirm the political will and commitment of the government of the Republic of South Sudan in implementing the outcomes of the COP27. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Her Excellency and would like now to welcome Her Excellency Mrs. Joyle Clark, Minister of Sustainable Development, Environment, Climate Action, and Constituency Empowerment of St. Kitts and Nevis. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Presidents, Prime Ministers, Excellencies, I am honored to join you at this critical event, the most prominent stage for climate action. Mr. President, St. Kitts and Nevis lends its voice to the plight of small island developing states to support transparent, robust, actionable pathways to address climate change impacts on lives and livelihoods. We have arrived here equipped with climate science that has never been clearer. To use a phrase coined by the ICD of Taiwan, science enables action, which informs each of our appropriate and practical steps to address climate vulnerabilities. There are countries that do not have the financial resources and sufficient human capital to respond to or even become fully conscious of the potential ravaging effects of climate change. Mr. President, there is no region in the world, however, that can escape the climate change experience. But what we do know is that the experience is devastating. Our survival is severely threatened, particularly as SIDS. In my country, climate events disrupt the livelihoods of families whose incomes depend on tourism or agriculture. In many cases, it is a single mother, a taxi driver, a farmer, the elderly who are most affected. This is a vicious cycle of climate hazards. We lose lives, income scarcity, scarcity of food and water, problems with health and wellness, higher costs of living, and the disruption of our families. The glaring fragility of our small state is magnified by our climate experiences. The severity of loss and damage is traumatic. What then is the game changer? There is no action without addressing climate justice, which embraces climate finance, a perennial challenge of SIDS. We must start by acknowledging the vast differences in the economies of scale and fiscal inability to respond to such climate events, as well as the problems of classifications as a middle-income country based solely on GDP. In St. Kitts and Nevis, we have embarked on a journey of green possibilities. Our goal is to become a sustainable island state. Our energies are currently focused on harnessing geothermal energy. Our 39-year-old friendship with the Republic of China, Taiwan, has supported our renewable energy pathway. Together, we have produced 2.5 megawatts of renewable energy for our citizens. Taiwan has partnered with many countries to reduce emissions. We here proclaim that COP27 is one of action and implementation and has been branded Together for Implementation. Mr. President, St. Kitts and Nevis highly recommends that the Republic of China, Taiwan become observers. Your serious consideration will be highly appreciated. In particular, we have in St. Kitts and Nevis an invitation to sing one song. This is a song penned by our renowned calypsonian who happens to be our Minister of Energy. Are we waiting blindly for 2030? Together, we should sing one song for the fight for climate action, climate justice, and climate finance. Thank you for your kind attention.
I thank Her Excellency and would like now to welcome Her Excellency Mrs. Esa Sharon Morna Niue, Minister of Natural Resources of Niue. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, fellow small island developing states, and especially Niue's Pacific family, I stand before you today to amplify our voice to the many issues that have been made on this podium over the last 10 days and many years before. I stand on the shoulders of my ancestors, beating and echoing the drums for our survival, for our future and the generations yet to come. The drum beats are getting louder, with greater urgency for action. COP27 is an implementation COP. Let's make it happen. Let's turn those drum beats from our islands to be sounds of celebrations, sounds of action, and not sounds of despair. We call for timely access to climate finance, delivered through modalities with the least amount of transaction cost and commensurate with our absorptive capacity. These are the sounds that we seek, and we look to you, our partners, to join our journey. Let's honor the drumbeats by availing those climate funds promised to us. Expedite their release so we can address loss and damage, and streams of program activities set out for execution and work in unity to reach a common goal. Niue have done everything that we possibly can to access climate finance to help us mitigate and adapt. There are large disparities in accessing climate finance. This is an unacceptable situation for island countries whose existence is under threat. Niue continues to take bold steps with a new innovative solution. We do this because we simply do not have the time to navigate the camel's eye, to find the passcode, to unlock the elusive treasure chest. We have developed a homegrown, innovative solution to raise funds for climate adaptation and mitigation, using our blue ocean and through our commitments on ocean conservation and protection. This is a world-first environment and non-financial instrument called Ocean Conservation Unit. Our objective is to establish a new and ocean-wide trust fund that can provide a consistent funding stream to help our climate mitigation and adaptation priorities. The funding mechanism is scalable and replicable. Our goal is to raise at least $32 million to capitalize our trust fund and making available $1.5 million annually for 20 years. The $32 million is based on aggregated cost of protecting and maintaining 1 square kilometer of the Moana Mahu Marine Protected Area, comprising 40% of Niue's EEZ, or 127,000 square kilometer. As a champion for social inclusion and gender, I am reminded of the realities women and girls face every day, from experiencing domestic violence, bearing the unburden of unpaid work, to barriers limiting their economic empowerment and participation in public life. And if this isn't enough, they, with other marginalized communities, have to deal with the disproportionate impacts of climate change. I urge all of us to include women, girls, children, youth, persons with disabilities in all our decision-making and actions. Our Pacific leaders have endorsed our 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent to guide our journey as one strong, secure, inclusive, resilient Blue Pacific, ensuring a future that we can be proud to leave behind for our grandchildren, the mokupunas of Moana Nui. Let's drown out the cries of despair and calm the beating hearts of fear from our kids and our vulnerable communities, assuring them that all will be okay. Let's change the drumbeats to action, innovative and sounds of joy. It starts with us as world leaders.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Habib, Minister of Sustainable Development, Climate Change and Disaster Risk Management of Belize. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Your Excellencies, allow me to convey greetings on behalf of Prime Minister John Briceño and the government and people of Belize. I also extend my delegation's appreciation to the government of Egypt for being such gracious hosts. I arrived at Sharm el-Sheikh with a heavy heart after witnessing the devastation caused by Hurricane Lisa in Belize, leaving our old capital devastated. Initial assessments reveal an approximate US $100 million in physical and social damages, with a total of 500 homes lost or extensively damaged. 5,000 persons were in shelters and had to be housed and fed. Losses of this singular event are estimated at about 10% of our national budget, not accounting for ripple effects, including social and health impacts. Monies that could otherwise be used for health, for education, and poverty alleviation. Unfortunately, such catastrophe is just a testament to the impacts of the climate emergency, which regrettably is a forerunner of a new hostile global climate regime of our own making. Mr. President, this COP is an implementation COP. We need action. Where are those actions? In how many COPs have we been arguing for urgent climate action? And how many more do we need to have? How many lives do we need to sacrifice to solve the biggest crisis we face in our civilization? Belize joins other nations in expressing its profound sympathies to the people of Cuba, Puerto Rico, Canada, Nicaragua, El Salvador, and the United States of America, who have been devastated by the passage of Hurricane Julia, Ian, and Fiona, which were described as some of the strongest Atlantic hurricanes in modern record. Lives were lost and livelihoods upended. Hurricane Fiona caused flooding, destruction of residential housing, and infrastructural damage all across Belize due to heavy torrential rains and strong winds. Small island developing states such as Belize continue to be severely impacted by climate change across all sectors. SIDS continue to face natural, health-related, social, and economic shocks that are beyond domestic control. The growing vulnerability of SIDS is a direct consequence of being in climate-sensitive zones and are especially prone to the destructive impacts of climate change, with damage costing approximated $12.6 billion per annum. Losses due to natural hazards exceed an average of $46 million per year in Belize. Even in the face of these challenges, Belize continues to implement targeted actions to mitigate and to help our people to adapt to the impacts of climate change. Belize's updated NDC shows a 5% increase in overall commitment. UNFCCC synthesis reports on NDCs show that even if all unconditional and conditional nationally determined contributions, the combined pledges of 193 parties of the Paris Agreement would put the world on track for achieving 2.5 degrees Celsius of warming by the end of the century. Such a scenario will inevitably lead to overshoot of the 1.5 degrees centigrade goal, resulting in irreversible impacts on SIDS. This would necessitate making drastic and unprecedented emission cuts across all sectors. We join the call for the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. We need stronger commitments and actions from the G20 and other large polluters. We need to keep 1.5 alive. Mr. President, urgent actions need to be implemented for the reduction of emissions from critical sectors such as energy, transport, forest, waste, and agriculture. Belize continues to prioritize its critical forest resource with effective policies, strategies, and meaningful actions, resulting in a national forest cover of over 60%. As we endeavor to build our current efforts, market-based approaches become increasingly important if we are to achieve the further emission cuts committed in our NDC. As climate change mitigation falls short, discussion on averting, minimizing, and addressing loss and damage associated with the adverse effects of climate change becomes urgent. In his speech a few days ago, President Biden spoke of climate justice and reiterated that no one should be left behind. Mr. President, Taiwan, as the world's 21st largest economy, should be afforded the opportunity to share its technologies, resources, and expertise with the world in addressing climate change. Therefore, the government of Belize supports Taiwan and calls for its professional, pragmatic, and constructive participation in the UNFCCC. Mr. President, progress has been slow over the years, but at COP27, we have a make-or-break opportunity to get on track. Climate action and the provision of support to those in need must be given top priority. The world is depending on us, and we cannot let them down. Please be assured of Belize's support for a successful climate change conference here in Egypt. And in President Biden's words, let us write a better story for the world. And I say, there is no better legacy we can leave for our future generation. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now it's my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Ms. Savavares Dottir, Minister of Food, Agriculture and Fisheries of the Iceland. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, the science is clear. Recently, new reports, there among publications from the IPCC and the UNEP, all state the same scientific evidence, the stark reality of climate change. We are already seeing shocking extreme weather events around the globe. We see extensive water shortages from shrinking glaciers and snowpack, global sea level rise from ice sheet and glacier loss, wildfires, floods, and landslides. But these are just a mild prelude to the catastrophes ahead if we do not act now and act fast. Tomorrow, Iceland and Chile will launch an initiative called Ambition on Melting Ice, where at least 18 countries have confirmed their willingness to join. The initiative has a clear goal to protect the frozen areas on our Earth through vigorous climate action. It is not only a matter for mountain and polar nations alone, it is a matter of urgent global concern. All of us need to make it a priority to reduce emission. This is a matter of urgency. As a part of this important path, the Icelandic government has decided not to issue any licenses for oil exploration in Iceland's exclusive economic zone. Further, the Icelandic government will propose to Parliament to ban all oil exploration within the economic zone of Iceland. Ladies and gentlemen, the science tells us that the changes will be vastly greater if we don't manage to keep warming within 1.5 degrees Celsius. This fact alone should inspire us to cut emissions. Iceland has set itself an ambitious independent national target of a 55% reduction in emissions, for which Iceland is directly responsible for by 2030 compared to 2005 levels. Iceland also participates in reaching a 55% reduction target in emission with Norway and the European Union. Iceland emphasizes that we must keep the goal on 1.5 centigrades alive, but as it stands, we are heading the wrong way. While we need to lower our emissions to resist climate change, we also need to adapt to those changes already occurring and that will magnify in the future. Adaptation is an increasingly important issue for Iceland, both domestically and internationally. Iceland has increased contributions to international climate finances with special emphasis on adaptation and will continue to do so. Among Iceland's biggest threats from climate change are ocean acidification, melting ice, both glaciers and permafrost, sea level rise, and changes in precipitation. This affects ecosystems and biodiversity on which we base our societies. Iceland underscores the importance of building adaptation measures on scientific grounds and the best possible information available with the broad participation of stakeholders and local communities. Food systems are an example of the transboundary implications, as many countries are reliant on products from multiple parts of the world. Iceland is an example of this, with geographical setting in the middle of the North Atlantic and reliant on imported food and supplies for food production. Ladies and gentlemen, knowing that, here is the place where we can really make changes. Let's be those who are and will be remembered for taking responsibility, be brave, and let's be the catalyst of change. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now it's my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Mohammed Hassan Abdullah, Minister of Environment of Nigeria. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I present the statement of His Excellency President Muhammadu Buhari, the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, and the Chairman, Conference of Head of States and Government of Pan-African Great Green Wall. Mr. President, on behalf of Nigeria and its delegation, I congratulate you on your election as the President of the 27th session of the Conference of Parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and assure you of Nigeria's full support as we lead our deliberations. At COP26, I did say that for Nigeria, climate change is not about the perils of tomorrow, but what is happening today. Today, Nigeria is currently grappling with devastating effects of terrible flooding, which has affected 3.2 million persons. Over 600 lives lost, over 100,000 persons displaced, and over 300 hectares of farmlands destroyed. Nigeria, and indeed the rest of Africa, from the Sahara to the Cape, is living with increasing fear of food insecurity as a result of the floods. The economic cost for loss and damage for Africa is estimated at almost United States dollars 2 trillion, excluding non-economic losses. Developed nations must not ignore the demand from developing nations to establish a loss and damage finance facility to help developing nations recover from the adverse effects of climate change, particularly the devastating floods, worsening desertification, and rising sea levels. At COP26 in Glasgow, I announced Nigeria's commitment to net zero by 2060 on the basis of a detailed energy transition plan. This plan, the first of its kind in Africa, highlights the significant scale of resources required to attain both development and climate ambitions by 2060. However, the public finance urgently needed to fund energy transitions and climate action is lacking, a situation compounded by debt distress affecting many low and middle-income countries. We are therefore taking bold steps to pioneer innovative climate finance instruments, such as debt for climate swaps, and championing the development of the African Carbon Market Initiative. In support of this, Nigeria has enacted the Climate Change Law, alongside the initial governance framework, and launched the Nigeria Emission Trading Scheme. To signal investment readiness, we have made significant progress in creating the enabling policies and incentives to advance a short list of priority projects, including renewable solar independent power plant, scaled decentralized renewable energy projects, and gas-fired commercialization opportunities, to name a few. We are hopeful that investors at the global community will recognize the immense investment opportunities and potential for support. Mr. President, as the largest economy in Africa, we are engaging the G7 to request the inclusion of Nigeria in the G7's climate partnership list for the co-creation of a just energy transition partnership. Nigeria and the rest of Africa call for an effective and sustainable framework that will address the socio-economic effects of energy transition, including energy poverty, loss of jobs and livelihoods. Finally, Africa contributes about 3% to the global emissions, but is left to cope with the devastating impacts of climate change. Nigeria has spearheaded initiatives aimed at recovering degraded land for Sahara and the Sahel, such as the Great Green Wall. There is a dire need to expand existing adaptation acceleration programs for developing countries. I thank you for listening to me, Mr. President.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now it's my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Ms. Montoya, Minister of Science, Technology and the Environment of Cuba. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Good morning, President, Your Excellencies, distinguished ministers. The hallmark of this COP is that it is taking place in Africa, one of the most biodiverse continents, and in a complex international context. The time to adopt decisions and the necessary actions to reverse climate change is running out. What we do has to be consistent with history and not forget that the roots of this problem lie in the capitalist system, which is responsible for a predatory and consumerist development model. What is happening has an impact on global ethics and aesthetics, with a deterioration in the quality of life of humanity and its environment and infrastructure throughout the world. As a result of extreme weather events, people are dying, cities and traditions are being destroyed, the historical memory and food and energy security of nations is being affected, which damages people's mental well-being. Each year in my country, we experience the uncertainty of knowing whether or not we will be afflicted by a hurricane, heavy rains, or severe droughts. These vulnerabilities are compounded by the cruel and unjust economic, commercial, and financial embargo imposed by the USA, which has been rejected no less than 30 times by the international community, and yet it has not budged. Nonetheless, Cuba continues making progress in the 5 years of implementation and results of the state plan to combat climate change, known as Life's Task. One of these is the creation of the climate foundation called IRIS, United for Climate, and we place at your disposal that foundation to support national and regional efforts. What is at stake is sustainable development, the eradication of poverty, and man's survival. We owe it to future generations that we have a commitment to act and to achieve open climate governance and ethics rooted in solidarity and financial justice. Climate solidarity means desisting from acting out of individual economic interests. It means thinking about those who are losing their livelihoods. It means changing unsustainable consumption patterns. It means helping the most vulnerable. Financial justice means making available new and additional funds to compensate for loss and damage. And it means implementing adaptation measures, which we need, and simplifying procedures, and agreeing on a new financial goal. And I'll conclude by recalling the speech of the historic leader of the Cuban Revolution, Fidel Castro, at Rio 92, which I quote because it remains relevant. An important biological species is threatened with extinction, man. There's a need to distribute better wealth and technology available in the planet, less luxury and less squandering of resources so that there is less poverty and less hunger. May selfishness end, may hegemonies end, may insensitivity end, may irresponsibility and deceit end. Tomorrow will be too late to do what we should have done long ago. End of quotation, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Murat Kurum, Minister of Environment, Urbanization and Climate Change of Turkey. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Your Excellency, President of COP27, honorable ministers, distinguished participants, I'd like to extend my regards to you all. I hope the decisions to be taken at the meetings of the 27th Conference of the Parties will yield beneficial results for the future of our common home and humanity. The main reason why we are coming together today is to fight the climate change and to keep the 1.5-degree target alive in the fight against climate change. Implementing the Paris Agreement is no longer an option, but it is an obligation for all countries. In this regard, all of us must realize the green transformation in our countries successfully by creating effective policies. In line with our Turkey Century Vision declared by His Excellency Mr. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan as we enter the centennial anniversary of our republic, we have opened a new era in the fight against climate change with 2053 net zero emission and green development targets of our country. With the targets of increasing the amount of green space, nature conservation projects, renewable energy, infrastructure works, sustainable municipal works, self-sufficient cities in every aspect, we are working to build barrier-free and accessible cities that do not waste energy and that do not generate waste. Our purpose is, with the magnificent Turkish cities of the Turkey century, which we present to the world and humanity with new reforms and interpretations that center the environment, people, and nature. And our objective is to leave no one and no country behind. As a result of these important efforts, I'd like to share two significant decisions with you. Firstly, we have prepared the nationally determined contribution of Turkey, which will be a significant reference in the fight against climate change in consultation with all of our institutions and with the private sector with a scientific, participatory, and transparent approach. We have updated our contribution, which is economy-wide, including 7 emission reduction sectors and adaptation components, and in line with our 2053 net zero target, with more ambitious targets than the previous one, which will realize the green transformation. In this context, as Turkey, we are increasing our emission reduction target that we announced as 21% from business as usual by 2030, and we increase it to 41%. Thus, we will have reduced approximately 500 million tons of emissions in the year 2030. Secondly, our emissions will reach the peak latest by 2038, and we will continue to move forward with our strong policies towards our net zero target. Our nationally determined contribution also includes the policies put forward for adaptation. We will have significant transformation processes in all climate-related fields such as energy, industry, transportation, buildings, waste sector, carbon sinks, and clean transportation. We are confident that the TOGG, T-O-G-G, which is Turkey's domestic and national electric automobile, to be on the roads in March 2023. And the car will make significant contributions to the green transformations of our country and the world. We are contributing to the fight against climate change with the zero waste movement carried out under the auspices of His Excellency Madam First Lady Emine Erdogan. With the Global Zero Waste Goodwill Declaration signed between Turkey and the United Nations, this movement has become a global environmental mobilization. Support of these efforts by all countries is a must and essential for the future of our common home, the world. Another important step forward green transformation is to enact the draft climate law in our parliament. Turkey will take more impactful and resolute steps in its fight against climate change with the climate law. Distinguished participants, Turkey is one of the strong and pioneering countries in implementing environmental and climate policies. We hosted the G20 in 2015. World Humanitarian Summit, COP22 of the Barcelona Convention, and UN Habitat meetings, and we have ensured many international meetings to be held successfully. In line with the knowledge and experiences we have as Turkey, we would like to host the 31st Conference of the Parties to be held in 2026 in our country. We believe that we will contribute to the development of climate policies at the international level with the meetings to be held in Turkey with your support. When we went to the region right after the flood disaster in the friendly and brotherly country Pakistan, we went to the region and we witnessed that there is no place that water cannot go. Our President Recep Tayyip Erdogan elaborates on every platform. A fairer world is possible. And it is our duty to increase our international cooperation and solidarity and not leave anyone behind. This has to be our essential task. Today, the disaster occurring in Pakistan might happen in any country. In this sense, it is a conscientious responsibility on everyone who attends this meeting to always keep the issue of loss and damage on the agenda and hear the voices of the most vulnerable countries. I once again would like to avail this opportunity to express my pleasure to come together with you, and I'd like to extend my regard to you all. I thank wholeheartedly to the Arab Republic of Egypt for their warm welcome and the perfect organization of this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Jadabo, Minister of Climate Change and National Resilience of Nauru. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, colleagues, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to begin by thanking the government of Egypt for their hard work and preparation for COP27. I would also like to thank the people of Egypt for their warm welcome to their beautiful and historical country. Mr. President, this is, of course, the 27th Conference of the Parties. 27 years of negotiating. 27 years of decision, all directed at one purpose, clearly expressed in the Convention, and that is to prevent dangerous interference with the climate system. Mr. President, I hope you would agree that we are well past dangerous. I would rattle off the list of impacts on vulnerable countries like my own, but you have heard them all before. You will likely hear several variations of that same list throughout the day. We have all heard them many, many times for the past 27 years. For 27 years, small island nations have made appeals to our common humanity, to our shared values. We have placed our full trust in Western experts who have pushed false solutions and urge us to compromise for the good of the process. We have allowed ourselves to become props in environmental campaigns. Aspiring international celebrities have launched entire career on the back of our projected demise. It is hard to conclude that this strategy has been anything but a failure. The decision makers, those with real powers, simply do not care. They do not care about the communities that will be displaced and destroyed. They do not care about the food and water shortages that ravage poor countries. All they care about is power, pure and simple. and they are willing to use all the tools at their disposal to maintain that power, regardless of the consequences to countries like mine. How do we know this? We have seen what happens when their security, when their wealth and their power are threatened. They will move heaven and earth to protect their perceived interests. It does not matter if it takes money or sanctions or bombs. The rest of us are merely collateral damage. It is long past time that we recognize this reality and start behaving accordingly. This is normally the point in a statement where I would pivot to a more inspirational message about our collective power, the power of youth, the power of science, and the power of solidarity. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to do that today because I do not want to insult your intelligence, and quite frankly, I'm not in the mood. Ultimately, I can only speak credibly about the power of my country and whether or not we will use that power to protect my people. We can no longer let this process obstruct or distract from our responsibility to protect the people. Climate change is no longer a prospective danger to be avoided. It is a clear and present danger that will only grow for decades to come. For Nauru, climate change is an issue of national security. And as an issue of national security, we must forge alliances that protect our national security, not based on some vaguely worded promises about a distant future, but based on material outcomes in the here and now, material outcomes on the ground in Nauru. I would like to recognize the contributions of Taiwan to both my country's development and to the fight against climate change globally, and urge parties and the Secretariat to agree on an appropriate arrangement for their professional, pragmatic, constructive participation in the UNFCCC and its associated mechanisms. Mr. President, I do believe we are approaching the point at which the major powers will mobilize to address the impacts of climate change. The impacts are reaching a level that is destabilizing, even for them. We may even see it within the next 27 years. Last question I have for you, Mr. President, is how will they respond? Will they respond with money? Will they respond with sanctions? Will they respond with bombs? Or will they finally recognize that climate change can only be solved through true global solidarity? I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Faleh Nasser Al Thani, Minister of Environment and Climate Change of Qatar. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
In the name of God, Mr. President, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, may the peace of God be with you. At the outset, I would like to express my thanks and gratitude to the Arab Republic of Egypt for hosting this very important COP. I also wish to thank the Secretariat of the UNFCCC and all those organizing the conference. I also seize this opportunity to thank Her Excellency Ms. Patricia Espinosa for the work done during her mandate. We also congratulate Mr. Simon Still for assuming the post of Executive Secretary. Ladies and gentlemen, this conference is being held at a critical juncture. In dealing with climate change, we hope it will be a driving force for collective action and for building on the outcomes of previous COPs. These included many important points, including COP18, held in Qatar in 2012. This reflects our determination to face this critical world challenge. We have made it a priority and have put Qatar's national vision for 2030. This is a roadmap for our future and reflects our challenges and aims at achieving sustainable and balanced growth. We believe in the importance of research, and we have invested in many research centers. These have led to many achievements, projects, and to enhancing the knowledge-based advice and building capacity. We are keen on guaranteeing that students include this important scientific research from early stages. Ladies and gentlemen, to achieve the national strategic objectives for environment and climate change in Qatar, we have developed a national plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 25% in all sectors by 2030. We have included many sectors also for adaptation. In addition, we have made strides in the field of renewable energy, and we recently launched a solar energy station that provides 10% of Qatar's needs in electricity. Ladies and gentlemen, the national determined contributions of Qatar reflect its ambition. We will continue working to translate these ambitions to facts. In conclusion, I seize this opportunity to welcome all to attend the World Cup that will be hosted by Qatar after a few days in order to enjoy the first ever carbon-neutral World Cup. We hope that this Cup will be successful, will achieve the desired objectives. I thank you.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Fernando Andres Lopez Larrenaga, Minister of Environment and Natural Resources of El Salvador. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Señor Presidente.
President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I'd like to extend my thanks to the Arab Republic of Egypt as the host country of this 27th Conference of Parties. El Salvador is the country I represent. It's a small volcanic country in Central America. It's known for its coffee and its world-class surfing waves. But we're also known for the fact that according to the IPCC, we're one of the top 20 countries to be affected by extreme weather events. We've been facing extreme droughts and more extreme weather events. They reach us from both the Pacific and the Atlantic Oceans. This hinders our development, causing economic losses, and sometimes people lose their lives. They're a threat to our water security as well. So we're ringing the alarm bell because we're one of the countries that are most affected by climate change. And in addition, we are taking all the necessary initiatives, but we need a great deal of support. We've taken a lot of actions in the area of adaptation and mitigation to climate change. We have submitted our nationally determined contribution in line with the Paris Agreement. Climate change requires everybody's involvement from all sectors. We've developed a national environment policy and a national plan for adaptation to climate change. We are working towards low-carbon economy. We're developing low-carbon farming, and we hope to achieve carbon neutrality in that sector. We are working on environmental compensation schemes and implementing a new water management law. We have promoted recycling of waste, and we have a national energy policy which runs up to 2050. We are changing everything within our borders. We have reduced the murder rate, bringing us to the highest level of safety in Central America. Now it's up to all of us to work on climate change. There are dangers to our national security, sovereignty, and our ecosystems. We have security challenges on our borders threatening our sovereignty. We call on good practices and solidarity to be shared. We must all join together in this global challenge. Our people are losing their livelihoods. Their lives are threatened. That is the reality of how climate change is impacting Salvadorians and many others around the world. We must achieve tangible agreements for the action that we need in countries like mine. We have so few resources for such huge challenges. We call on emitter countries to meet their climate obligations and that they step up to the level of ambition we need in order to achieve the Paris Agreement targets. Not only should they reduce their emissions, but they must also provide new and additional funding so that we can tackle adaptation and loss and damage associated with climate change. Our people are dying and we're losing our cultural heritage as well. I'm not speaking to you as a civil servant, but as one of the 7 million Salvadorian citizens. We must take clear and tangible action because our very nations are at risk. El Salvador is a small country, but we stand ready to overhaul our country. Thank you very much.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Christopher Bowen, Minister of Climate Change and Energy of Australia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Inyagai Minakoi, Ubalinga Yamulis, Australia Pa. That means I have the privilege of speaking to you on behalf of Australia in one of the languages of the people of the Torres Strait, the islands that run to the northeast of our country. The people of the Torres Strait have inhabited their lands for 70,000 years. For them, for our brothers and sisters in the Pacific family, for our farmers paying the price of climate change, for Australians facing ever-increasing risk of flood and bushfire, for everyone around the world facing natural disasters that are increasingly unnatural, Australia is acting. And for them, the world must act. Australia is back as a constructive, positive and willing climate collaborator. One of our first acts on coming to government was to increase our emissions reduction target to 43% by 2030. In our nationally determined contribution and to enshrine that law in the law of the land. Within this decade, 82% of Australia's energy supply will be renewable. The future of energy is renewable, not just for Australia, but it must be for the world. And it's urgent that we accelerate the renewables transformation this decade. Such a transformation is both a challenge and an opportunity, but mostly it is fundamentally necessary if we are to have any hope of success in mitigating climate change. That's why it's so important we send the message from this COP, loud and clear. We remain committed to last year's commitment to hold the world as close as possible to 1.5 degrees of warming, and that we must embrace a faster and more orderly transition to renewable energy as part of these efforts. The cost of letting these priorities fall to the wayside is too great. Climate change is the primary economic and security challenge for our region and an existential threat to the blue Pacific continent. That's why we're boosting assistance to the region with an additional $900 million to support the Pacific family's development and resilience in dealing with the climate emergency. And that's why, along with Pacific nations, we are seeking to host COP31 in 2026. Pacific voices have led this debate for decades and they must be heard. Unfortunately, we know the story of our region, the story that we will tell if the world fails to act. From island communities facing the fight for their existence to towns and cities battling ever more frequent bushfires and floods. Our co-hosting will seek to accelerate global action and harness the economic opportunities of the clean energy transition. While Australia has increased our ambition, we know there is much more to do. That's why, just as this COP is focusing on ambition and implementation, Australia's government is focusing on real emissions reductions as well, through our $20 billion fund to transform our energy grid and many other policies. Because while we talk about the risks of climate change, we also need to think about the immense economic opportunities that come with action. And Australia wants to be a renewable energy superpower. In coming weeks, I'll be delivering Australia's first annual climate change statement to our Parliament, a comprehensive and transparent stocktake of how we're tracking against our NDCs and how we'll make further progress. Because the urgency with which we must act requires frank conversations about where we are now, where we're going, and how we're going to get there. Collectively, we now have just 85 months to achieve our 2030 targets. We all know this is the critical decade, and that means national action, but it also means multilateral action, and action by every single one of our institutions. Our international financial architecture was built for a different time and different challenges. Some of our financial institutions are stepping up to this task, our most important global job, but others are not. Just as we commit to this agenda as individual nations, our multilateral development banks, including the World Bank, must be wholeheartedly committed to this task from their purpose and their actions. We have a moral imperative and a driving need for our institutions to work with countries across the developed and developing world, not only to reduce emissions, but to respond to a changing climate and its economic impact on nations. That will mean increasing the proportion of funding spent on climate, but also ensuring that such funding doesn't saddle developing countries with unsustainable debt. This fight cannot be done by one nation. All emitters, past, present and future, have a responsibility to act. We must drive an inclusive climate agenda. I reaffirm Australia's commitment to ambitious and necessary change and pledge to be a strong and constructive partner along the way. Thank you.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Sean Audrey Edward, Minister of Education, Sustainable Development, Innovation, Science, Technology and Vocational Training of St. Lucia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, I bring you warm greetings from the Prime Minister of St. Lucia, Philip J. Pierre, and the government and people of St. Lucia. Permit me to place on the record St. Lucia's gratitude to the government and people of Egypt for their warmth and hospitality as host of COP27. Mr. President, Excellencies, fellow delegates, like my colleagues from the Caribbean, I have traveled half the circumference of the globe to be here against the prevailing perception of most citizens of our small island developing states who hold the view that COP can best be described as an academic exercise of talk and inaction because of its failure over the years to deliver concrete solutions to their climate-related problems they did not create. Mr. President, an implementation COP, this is what COP27 is meant to be. Prior to departing my country a few days ago to be here, I witnessed firsthand the destruction caused by a weather system which affected the northern part of our 238 square mile island. In the space of 3 hours, heavy rainfall led to the destruction of homes, businesses, vehicles, schools, and other vital infrastructure. Within that short period, millions of dollars of damage was recorded. Mr. President, St. Lucia and other small island developing states are living the horrific effects of climate change on a daily basis, a situation we did not create but are unjustly being made to pay for. The governments of SEEDS continue to experience a growing debt burden, forced to borrow beyond prudential limits to respond to the effects of climate change. This cycle of debt exacerbates the already debilitating fiscal position of SEEDS and hinders our ability to not only treat with the issues of climate change, but also provide basic necessities to our people. When will developed countries deliver on their promises to double adaptation finance towards making meaningful advances on our decisions in support of the upcoming global goal on adaptation? When will we break the constant talk cycle by delivering on our promises to scale up adaptation grant finance and agree on a decision at COP27 that will go beyond simply supporting the development of national adaptation plans and provide support for their actual implementation? When will major emitters stop the backpedaling, where they commit to small gains in clean energy initiatives on one hand, while simultaneously multiplying their investments and profits in fossil fuels on the other hand? We, the people of St. Lucia, suffer the consequences of this hypocrisy. Mr. President, delegates, let us put people first. Addressing climate change requires a collaborative effort, one which transcends the boundaries of race, religion, geography, gender, political status, or even economic circumstances. A nation like Taiwan, though not recognized by the United Nations and its subsidiaries as a bona fide state, also has to contend with climate change, yet it is denied a seat at the negotiating table, despite Taiwan's demonstrated commitment to fighting climate change domestically and in the developing world. The government and people of St. Lucia are grateful to the government and people of Taiwan for their unwavering support of our adaptation and mitigation efforts. Today, Mr. President, St. Lucia and the rest of the Caribbean call on world leaders, fellow delegates, and stakeholders to truly make this COP27 the implementation COP it is touted to be. Developed countries and agencies that are, whether by deliberate, bureaucratic means or otherwise, impeding access to pledge billions of dollars to developing countries for climate adaptation, must demonstrate greater sensitivity and honor their obligations to SEEDS. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Dato Abdul Manaf Metusini, Minister of Primary Resources and Tourism of Brunei, Darussalam. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Mr. President, esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, the world is not on track to meet the 1.5 degrees Celsius pathway. Science has shown that the effects of climate change has repercussions on the planet, as well as the people's life and prosperity. More severe impacts are in store if we fail to immediately scale up adaptations efforts and cut global greenhouse gas emission by half in this decade. The after effects of the global pandemic and the current landscape of the macro environment have generated effects that have rendered climate change efforts to be deprioritized for the sake of economic recovery. This means that the outlook for future generations remains uncertain. Alhamdulillah, despite the challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic, Brunei Darussalam remains committed to delivering our climate change goals, guided by our national vision, Wawasan Brunei 2035, and the Sustainable Development Goals. Brunei Darussalam, even though 72% of our land area is covered with forests, and is able to absorb 97% of our domestic greenhouse gas emissions, as a coastal country on the equator, we are not exempted from the effects of the climate crisis. Mean temperatures and rainfalls have been increasing, and if no effort is undertaken, key strategic areas in the country could be underwater as early as 2050. While our action so far has been successful in implementing climate change initiatives, there is still room for improvement. On this note, Mr. President, I would like to share 4 points drawing from our experiences. First, strong collaboration between the government and energy sector is essential. The reliance on the oil and gas industry is a crucial challenge for Brunei Darussalam in combating climate change. It requires concerted efforts to balance economic security and climate actions. On this note, together with the energy industry, we have stepped up efforts in driving energy transition and facilitating our climate mitigation and adaptation efforts. Second, a robust monitoring mechanism is crucial to meet the net zero target. Brunei Darussalam announced a high ambition to move towards net zero by 2050 through just transition and forest preservation. Without accurate data and proper monitoring in place, we will not be able to have an emission baseline and verified inventory of our natural sink. As such, Brunei Darussalam plans to launch a mandatory reporting directive with the objective to enhance the transparency of our emissions reporting and further help to substantiate our action to achieve our net zero ambition. Third, resource mobilization is required to accelerate mitigation and adaptation efforts. This is one of the current action aligned with the Brunei National Climate Change Policy launch in 2020. While we are meeting some of the targets set out by the adaptation plan to coordinate adaptation efforts to make Brunei Darussalam a climate resilient and adaptive nation. Mr. President and esteemed guests, the task ahead of us is not easy, but the task ahead of us is not easy, but the task ahead of us is not easy, but the task ahead of us is not easy, but the task ahead of us is not easy, but massive potential to unlock green growth and green jobs through the deployment and upscaling of new technologies to tackle the issues we are currently facing. And we can achieve this faster if we can work together. Brunei Darussalam is also proud to share that the ASEAN Center for Climate Change will be located in Brunei Darussalam once established. Although our country only contributes to about 0.017% of the global greenhouse emission, we believe our small action can lead to big impacts. So let's advance together in implementation. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Simo Kilepa, Minister for Environment, Conservation and Climate Change of Papua New Guinea. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Papua New Guinea has the honor to speak on behalf of the Coalition of Rainforest Nations. At the outset, we allied ourselves with a statement made by Pakistan on behalf of the Group of 77 and China. Mr. President, as the latest IPCC study indicated, the effects of climate change are much more severe than anybody have ever imagined. Achieving the 1.5-degree threshold as defined by the IPCC is therefore a must, and COP27 must deliver. Mr. President, let's be clear. The 1.5-degree goal is unattainable without REDD+ and full consideration of the world's rainforests. Dramatically slowing global deforestation is needed, and the REDD+ mechanism is singularly designed to achieve that goal. Article 5 of the Paris Agreement defines REDD+ as the only mechanism to implement forestry activities. Whether it is deforestation, degradation, or conservation, REDD+ is our North Star. It is based on a set of decisions that have been agreed and are now being implemented. Developing countries are now hard at work on Article 5, which should not be reopened. Our work to date should not be disrupted. It is now for corporates and governments to support verified UNFCCC REDD+ results when seeking to achieve net zero. Paris Agreement compliant sovereign carbon is the only standard that keeps 1.5 degrees possible. Mr. President, environmental integrity must be at the core of our work, and the COP27 outcome must be built on these principles. REDD+ decisions already ensure a high level of environmental integrity, and with other sectors should be based on the same rules, notably national GHG inventories and national reference levels. The same stringency should be reflected in Article 6 guidance, as this is a critical condition for the private sector to engage with the Paris Agreement. The elements of the enhanced transparency framework created by the Paris Agreement must include clear and simple decisions that are consistent with previous agreed rules. Emission reductions or removals not included in our NDC's national monitoring system and GHG inventories must not qualify for international transfer. Mr. President, rainforest nations have already delivered more than 90 gigatons of greenhouse gas emissions reductions. This is an astounding figure and proof that REDD+ mechanism has been of immediate benefit. These actions deserve to be adequately rewarded so that we can continue to effectively address the global climate emergency. For this reason, we reinforce the reality that REDD+ results are internationally transferred mitigation options for 2021 and beyond. As Article 6.2 is a critical tool allowing countries to fulfill their NDCs, it should include incentives for early pre-2020 REDD+ actions and should only include activities within their respective NDCs. REDD+ is part of Paris Agreement. The CDM is part of the past. REDD+ countries also need credit for early action. Mr. President, adaptation is of utmost importance of our countries. We must agree on a clear plan to define the global goal on adaptation. Adaptation finance should not be a small percentage of mitigation. It should be a real at scale. Finance for adaptation projects should come exclusively from developed countries. Mr. President, we have all made sacrifices to attend COP27. It is therefore imperative that we respect all views and engage all parties to find success. As usual, you can count on us and our support to deliver what is needed, what the world is expecting. Mr. President, I would like to take this opportunity in my national capacity to mention that Papua New Guinea's recent greenhouse gas inventory results have shown that Papua New Guinea has achieved net zero emissions mainly because of the implementation of the national REDD+ strategy. We are willing to do more as per our enhanced NDC and implementation plan. We are also in the process of finalizing our national adaptation plan. But as a small island developing state, we would like to request the developed countries to meet their commitment under the Convention of Paris Agreement in providing financial and technical support to us to implement our enhanced NDC as well as our national adaptation plan. Such support should be easily accessible. Papua New Guinea also supports the call from AOCs and Group of 77 and China that under your presidency in this scope, an arrangement should be made to establish an operating entity of the UNFCCC financial mechanism focused on addressing loss and damage in line with outlined function of COP27 to the design and further operationalization of the operating entity no later than COP29. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Conrad Hunt, Ambassador of Antigua and Barbuda to the United Nations. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, in 2017, the islands of Antigua and Barbuda were shattered by hurricanes Irma, then Maria. Damage totaled $136 million, with the tourism sector accounting for 44%. I witnessed the evacuation of my people from the entire island of Barbuda. What was a temporary measure dragged on, and some people never returned home. Climate and weather extremes are increasingly driving displacement in all regions, but especially in small island developing states. So concluded this year's climate science report of the IPCC. But Mr. President, what we are witnessing is a gaming of the system. Countries come here to this COP and make grand statements. Some are even funded by the very industry that we're here to phase out. The lackluster follow-up through could not be a clearer signal, as you can see. They are only concerned with keeping the fossil fuel industry as profitable as possible and as long as possible. And in the same minute, the whole issue of keeping 1.5 alive becomes an elusive dream. The system is being gamed at our expense as small island developing states and the expense of future generations. Antigua and Barbuda is here to declare that the gaming cannot continue, no longer. I call on the Secretary General of the United Nations to convene world leaders, major fossil fuel companies, to implore them to direct percentage of their profits to capitalize a climate insurance fund for loss and damage. This COP must establish a funding arrangement for loss and damage. As we see the inaction of many developed countries, the potential to stall talks and land a devastating blow for us as small island developing states is looming. But Antigua and Barbuda will not leave here without a loss and damage fund. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Gerson Elias Barrios Garrido, Minister of Environment and Natural Resources of Guatemala. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Señor Presidente, Excelencias, distinguida audiencia, Guatemala es un país megadiverso y multicultural. Es aún uno de los 20 países más diversos que resguardan junto a estos más del 70% de la diversidad biológica en el planeta, pero que constantemente está afectado por los efectos del cambio climático. De manera que estos efectos no solo ponen en peligro el patrimonio natural de Guatemala, sino el de toda la humanidad. Mi país, de acuerdo con el reporte del IPCC, ha sido identificado como uno de los 15 países más vulnerables en el mundo. De acuerdo a esta evidencia científica, contribuimos apenas con el 0.07 de las emisiones globales de gases de efecto invernadero. Según informes nacionales de la Secretaría General de Planificación de nuestro país y reportes internacionales de CEPAL, BID y Banco Mundial, han cuantificado las pérdidas económicas totales ocasionadas por los fenómenos hidrometeorológicos, los cuales ascienden a millones de dólares, obligando a centrar los recursos económicos en la recuperación y reconstrucción de infraestructura, además de la pérdida de biodiversidad, de los efectos socioeconómicos, la pérdida de los medios de vida de aproximadamente 2.5 millones de personas y la destrucción de cultivos, lo que incrementa tanto la inseguridad alimentaria como la inmigración forzada por los efectos del cambio climático y en ocasiones la pérdida de vidas humanas. En ese sentido, requerimos de manera urgente el apoyo y acceso a fuentes de financiamiento climático internacionales ágiles y efectivas, que permitan incrementar la implementación de acciones de mitigación y adaptación con el fin de reducir la vulnerabilidad e incrementar la resiliencia de la población al cambio climático. Guatemala quiere reiterar la petición realizada a la Organización de las Naciones Unidas y a la Convención Marco de las Naciones Unidas sobre Cambio Climático para que reconozca la alta vulnerabilidad de América Latina y el Caribe y la declare como una de las regiones más afectadas en el mundo por los efectos del cambio climático. Seguimos impulsando en nuestro país el modelo de concesiones forestales en la Reserva de la Biosfera Maya en el departamento del Petén, mediante el cual las comunidades protegen el bosque y gestionan los recursos de manera sostenible, impulsando la inclusión de mujeres en este proceso y aprovechando el conocimiento ancestral de nuestros pueblos indígenas. Hemos incrementado la cobertura forestal. En 2020 teníamos 250,000 hectáreas de concesiones forestales y en 2022, 2 años después, la meta fue duplicada, 550,000 hectáreas.
And lower levels of forest fires in the Mayo biosphere. It provides ecosystem services for the country, region and the world. I'd like to take this opportunity to refer in particular to the Taiwanese government, a brother country which has helped to strengthen adaptation and mitigation measures in Guatemala and beyond. So we urge that its participation be considered in the Paris Convention and Agreement so that it can join us in the fight against climate change. I round off by reiterating my country's commitment to tackling climate change. Let's go together for implementation. Thank you.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Bhupender Yadav, Minister of Environment, Forest and Climate Change of India. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Excellencies, let me first express our gratitude to our hosts and the presidency of COP27, the Arab Republic of Egypt, for their tremendous efforts and gracious hospitality. A year ago, at Glasgow, we responded to call of science and came forward with important pledges and commitment. This year, at Sharm el-Sheikh is our moment of action, and the presidency of Egypt has rightfully designated this as the COP of implementation. Excellencies, our Honorable Prime Minister, Shri Narendra Modi ji, announced India's aim of achieving net zero emission by 2070 at Glasgow. Within 1 year, India has submitted its long-term low emissions growth strategy indicating low carbon transition pathways in key economic sectors, responding to the call for increased ambition in our 2030 climate targets. India updated its NDC in August 2022. We have embarked our far-reaching new initiatives in renewable energy, e-mobility, ethanol-blended fuels, and green hydrogen as an alternate energy sources. We also seek to foster strong international cooperation through action and solution-oriented coalitions like International Solar Alliance and Coalition of Disaster Resilience Infrastructure, both of which are launched and nurtured by India. This is a testimony of our ethos of collective action for global good. India, home to 1.3 billion people, is undertaking this arduous effort despite the reality that our contribution to the world's cumulative emission so far is less than 4%, and our annual per capita emission are about 1/3 of the global average. At the heart of India's vision of a safe planet is a one-word mantra, Vasudhaiva lifestyle for environment, the Prime Minister Modi set forth in our national statement at COP26. Mission Life was launched by Prime Minister Modi in presence of the UN Secretary General, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, on 20th October 2022. The world urgently needs a paradigm shift from mindless and destructive consumption to mindful and deliberate utilization. We are trustees of this planet Earth. We must nurture it through sustainable lifestyles and optimize resource use and minimize waste. As the world's most populous democracy and a vibrant emerging economy, India seeks to lead by example and invites the global community to be a part of Mission Life for individual, family, and community-based actions. Excellencies, India is assuming the presidency of G20 in 2023 with the motto of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, means one earth, one family, one future. Our journey toward a planet safe for humanity, it is one that no nation can undertake alone. This is a collective journey to be undertaken with equity and climate justice as our guiding principles. We hope that the fight against climate change will unite the world as one family. Thank you very much.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Wilbert Rosas Beltran, Minister of the Environment of Peru. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Distinguished President, distinguished delegates, may I greet in Quechua you in one of the Quechua, which is one of the Andean indigenous languages in Peru.
Kaypi hununyanasqa kashanchis, llipinchay sasachakuy cambio climático sutichasqa, chay ch'uyanchananchispaq. Chaytan kunan p'unchay lluy llaqtakuna huñunasqa ch'uyanchasun. Hermanos y hermanas.
That was in Quechua. Brothers and sisters of Peru and around the world are demanding a response from us today to climate change. Please accept the greetings of the President of our Republic, Pedro Castillo Terrones, with whom we share our gratitude for the opportunity to convey our country's commitment to addressing the climate emergency with a sense of urgency and ambition, a climate emergency which we declared in our country this year. Adaptation to and mitigation of climate change are key to guaranteeing the well-being of the whole of humanity and a priority for Peru to achieve its goal of being a country of sustainable and inclusive development. To attain this, we are working towards a resilient and low-carbon economy in which we may be able to reduce our vulnerability and make the most of our standing forests and avoid the deglaciation of our mountain ranges while fostering energy transition towards renewable energies. Therefore, today I share the priorities of the Peruvian response to climate change in order to make this one of the best opportunities for development. Firstly, our forests and the indigenous peoples. We are committed to addressing the needs of the indigenous peoples, and with this in mind, we shall be promoting the design and implementation of the Indigenous Amazon Red Plus program, which will allow us to have productive conservation of the forests, and it will be implemented thanks to the fact that we are the first country which has in its governance an indigenous peoples platform to combat climate change. And secondly, our climate action, bringing together each and every player in the country. Mindful of the importance of establishing guidelines and incentives for the private sector to be able to participate in this endeavor, we are prioritizing the implementation of a national register of mitigation measures known as RENAMI, and therefore we are proposing coordinated work through South-South exchange, which will allow us to bolster environmental integrity and promote private investment, incorporating social and environmental safeguards. Thirdly, science as the basis for climate action. And to this end, Peru will have an observatory of scientific knowledge on climate change, and specifically on that issue of climate change in order to strengthen access to and use and dissemination of climate information generated scientifically at the national and international level, allowing us to take effective decisions. And lastly, our national strategy vis-à-vis climate change, looking to the horizon of 2050. The raison d'être of this climate action in our country is its people, which is why our future long-term strategy is an opportunity for addressing our youth, which at this summit has been represented through the participation of the national negotiating team as part and parcel of our commitment to place the well-being of people and youth at the heart of our objectives. For all of these reasons, I conclude by calling on you to restate your climate commitments through concrete and ambitious actions. That is the only way that we will be able to affirm that COP27 was the most important annual encounter for climate action and which took successful decisions to benefit our peoples. Thank you.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Hussein Makhlouf, Minister of Local Administration and Environment of the Syrian Arab Republic. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
President of COP27, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to express my deepest appreciation to the COP presidency and to the Arab Republic of Egypt for hosting this landmark conference at a time when the world is facing challenging circumstances at all levels, further compounded by the environmental crises on the back of climate change. The negative consequences of climate change must be addressed, building on the previous efforts. Syria has not been spared by climate change, just like other countries. This is epitomized by the reduced rain precipitation, and if rain falls, it falls very heavily in an unfamiliar fashion. In addition to the rising temperatures and the dust storms. This is only added to the negative consequences of the terrorist war against my country and against our environment. It is clear to everyone that the capture of oil pipelines and oil wells and incinerating such has caused wide-ranging pollution, in addition to the refining of oil in a rudimentary manner by terrorist groups and secessionist groups supported by the U.S. occupation. UCMs, on the other hand, imposed by certain countries against the Syrian people, led to stymieing a number of projects aimed at protecting the environment and promoting sustainable development. They also blocked the environment-friendly technology transfer to my country, given the fact that we are having trouble importing such equipment or in our inability to transfer funds. We should not forget the curtailing of water by the Turkish occupation that is supporting terrorist gangs in Al-Hasaka governorate. They have also reduced the flow of the Euphrates to minimal levels and denied the citizens and farmers in Syria and Iraq from irrigating their croplands. That has drastically impacted their economic, social, agriculture, and life situations. That has also affected biodiversity and natural habitat there. In addition, they have also uprooted the perennial olive trees and transferred them outside Syria, in addition to subverting and destroying the environment, farming, and the human beings. The Israeli occupation, on the other hand, in the occupied Syrian Golan continues its nefarious practices against people, land, water, plants, and structures. They have been uprooting the cherry and apple trees and destroying houses and dumping hazardous waste, in addition to controlling water and denying Arab Syrian citizens from having access to water. The share of Syrian citizens in the Golan is only 20% of his or her annual needs of water. The Syrian Arab Republic has been committed to the international environmental agreements to which it endorsed, including developing priorities, plans, and policies that aim at addressing climate change, including adopting the Syrian NDCs in line with the Paris Agreement, adopting the National Climate Change Program and adaptation plans, in addition to introducing the Renewable Energy Fund to provide concessional loans to citizens, in addition to holding economic events to promote energy transfer, promoting investment in energy generation from solid waste, increasing the forest areas through annual forestation plans, particularly those that were deliberately destroyed by terrorists, in addition to adopting environmental standards in order to reconstruct the structures that have been damaged by terrorism, and we call for the support of the climate funds to finance our domestic plans and projects. Ladies and gentlemen, Syria was not able to provide its second national report on climate change because of blocking the funding dedicated to Syria because of the UCMs. Therefore, we would like to affirm that necessary funding must be promoted, must be given through the GCF and the Adaptation Fund, along with the Global Environment Facility as well. Ladies and gentlemen, Syria needs international support to be able to overcome the raiding environmental situations so as to address climate change. And this requires the following: cooperation and solidarity between developing and developed countries, that the developed countries must fulfill its financial obligations as made in the previous COP summits, as well as working together to combat terrorism and realizing stability in the different nations, which would have a positive impact on mitigation and adaptation, technology transfer to developing countries without discrimination, stopping UCMs against Syria, which led to further environmental degradation in Syria and has undermined the Syrian ability to address climate change, along with other countries that are subject to such sanctions. In conclusion, we hope that the international community would help the Syrian state to facilitate voluntary return and safe return to Syria. We have already returned 5 million Syrians to their towns and villages to realize sustainable and balanced development in Syria. In conclusion, and since we are in the implementation summit, we call for a more equitable and just mechanism to mitigate climate change through providing financial pledges by the largest emitters, in addition to committing to the financing losses and damages to the most affected countries. And as such, we would be more cooperative, more in solidarity, and more and nearer to our goal. We hope that we can achieve a safe and secure environment to the generations to come and achieve welfare to our nations and people. Thank you.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Ms. Grace Fu, Minister of Sustainability and the Environment of Singapore. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, we are at a crossroad. There is a risk that parties may focus on the many pressing issues of the day and lose sight of the war on the climate crisis. This is why COP27 is pivotal. Our choices today will determine our future. Singapore calls for commitment, implementation, and partnerships for decisive global action in this decade to keep 1.5 degrees within reach. First, commitment. Singapore has strengthened our long-term LEDs to achieve net zero emissions by 2050 and updated our 2030 NDC to reduce our emissions to 60 million tons after peaking earlier than what we had previously committed to. Our ambitious targets are contingent on the maturity of decarbonization technologies and effective international cooperation, and depend on the continued international commitment by parties. Parties must deliver real emission reductions and demonstrate this by fulfilling their reporting obligations under the enhanced transparency framework. Singapore has acted by submitting our 5th biannual update report, 5th national communications, and 1st adaptation communication. Second, implementation. Singapore's targets are backed by concrete plans and policies. We have legislated to raise our carbon tax, developed a national hydrogen strategy as a major decarbonization pathway to net zero. We are also boosting food resilience through innovative production technologies and pushing boundaries to make our new towns more climate resilient. Lastly, we need partnerships in climate action. Situated in Southeast Asia, collaboration can catalyze the decarbonization of the region. Singapore plans to import up to 4 gigawatts of low-carbon electricity by 2035, and the pilot Lao, Thailand, Malaysia-Singapore power integration project can be a pathfinder for a low-carbon ASEAN power grid. Nature-based solutions offer opportunities for mitigation and adaptation, with win-win partnerships under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. At COP27, we are pleased to be joining coalitions including the Forest and Climate Leaders Partnership, Green Shipping Challenge, Egypt's Aware on Water Security, and UN's Early Warning for All initiative. But most of all, multilateralism, including the UNFCCC, remains crucial for the just and inclusive transition. We must work together towards our agreed goals for a greener planet. Global standards and tariff-free trade are essential to scale green technology and products. The world's largest emitters should lead the transition collaboratively. To support one another by building capacities, Singapore will launch a new 3-year sustainability action package to help build capacity and capability among fellow developing countries. Colleagues, now is the time to act. Let us answer the COP27 presidency's call to work together for implementation. Thank you.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is now my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Ms. Karine James, Minister for Climate Resilience, the Environment and Renewable Energy of Grenada. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Your Excellencies, Ministers, Deputy Ministers, distinguished representatives from various delegations, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. On behalf of the government and people of Grenada, let me begin by expressing my appreciation to the Egyptian government for the kind hospitalities provided to my delegation and I in facilitating our attendance here at COP27. Mr. President, when I arrived here this morning, I was struck by the fact that many agenda items remain unresolved. And I want to emphasize at the outset that there is a dire need for urgency in closing these items, and in fact, urgency in all that we do in addressing climate change. We need urgency because the climate is not waiting for us. We have seen it this year with climate-related disasters in every corner of our beautiful planet. And we need to move expeditiously to close the emissions gap, the ambition gap, and most significantly, the implementation gap. In this regard, we are concerned about the limited progress we have seen in implementing the Glasgow Climate Pact. We are concerned because, to date, only 29 countries have submitted their revised NDCs, and even these are not aligned with 1.5 degrees Celsius. Mr. President, we are also concerned because we have begun to see some of our partners backsliding on their commitments to end fossil fuel subsidies, backsliding on their commitments to begin the phase down of coal, and on their commitments to stop the flow of finance to fossil fuel investments. We are also concerned, Mr. President, about the slow progress on financing in general and financing for loss and damage in particular. This is a matter of the highest priority for my country, which has had more than its fair share of climate-related impacts in recent times. So as we gather here for the next 3 days, I call all of our partners to come to the table prepared to work on solutions, to come to the table with concrete proposals for ensuring that we do not lose this window of opportunity for avoiding the most catastrophic impacts of climate change, and to come to the table prepared to deliver on their commitments and obligations. Mr. President, my country has contributed significantly to this climate change process. It would be remiss of me if I do not take this opportunity to recognize the contributions of my fellow Grenadian and predecessor, Mr. Simon Steele, the Executive Secretary of this convention. To date, Mr. President, we continue to set the standards higher through the creation of a new ministry. And as the Minister for Climate Resilience, the Environment and Renewable Energy, and on behalf of the Government of Grenada, we will continue to give full support and our political commitment. And so in closing, Mr. President, you have our guarantee that we will continue to support this process and stand ready to assist you during the coming days to achieve great success at this COP27. I thank you.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Ms. Lupu Lama, Minister of Environment and Sustainable Development of Guinea. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Monsieur le Président.
President, Excellencies, Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of His Excellency, the President of the Transition, Head of State, Commander-in-Chief of the Army, Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya, and on behalf of the Guinean people and government, thank the government of the Arab Republic of Egypt for the excellent hospitality extended to my delegation since we arrived in the magnificent city of Sharm el-Sheikh. Guinea is a state party to the UNFCCC, the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement. We are committed to contributing to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Thus, we have endorsed our partnership and investment plans for the nationally determined contribution, sectoral climate plans, and the fourth greenhouse gas inventory since COP26 held in Glasgow. Nevertheless, we need to raise $14 billion of funds to implement these programs and projects. President, according to the 22 report of the IPCC, the Republic of Guinea is one of the lowest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions in the world, at less than 0.1%. Guinea has set an unconditional global target of 20%, which we've already achieved, and a conditioned one of 49% for 2030. We need technical and financial partners to support us in order to achieve this conditioned target so that we can implement the initiatives we need to considerably reduce environmental degradation through rational and sustainable management of natural resources, and also through increasing the number of protected areas and modernizing farming, mines and transports and promoting green energy. Biodiversity protection to improve people's ability to adapt to climate change is one of our government's priorities. In order to go about this, the Republic of Guinea calls for the climate funding gap, which has widened since 2020, to be closed, and for adaptation funding to be doubled. President, COP27 must be a COP of action and not a cop-out. People at large, and particularly the most vulnerable, such as women, children, bear the brunt of the climate crisis. This is because the crisis widens existing gender inequalities and endangers livelihoods. These people face a number of pressing challenges and await swift and responses which are up to the mark. That's why we must draw the attention of possible polluters and donors' attention to the lack of adaptation funds, but also above all the red tape weighing down disbursement procedures. We urge them to provide more transparency and flexibility. The Republic of Guinea President supports all environmental and sustainable development initiatives and stands by the concerns expressed by the least developed countries, Africa and the G77 and China. Through me, I would like to convey the Guineans, governments and peoples, congratulations to all the efforts made here to organise this COP in Sharm el-Sheikh and all those acting in favour of our planet. I thank you.
Excellency, for your statement. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Fidelis Manuel Leit Manguez, Minister of the Council of Ministers and Extraordinary Envoy of the President of the Democratic Republic of Timor-Leste. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Prime Ministers, Excellencies, CO2 emissions from fossil fuels and industry which power the world economy have been the primary driver of human-induced warming. Today, it reaches 10% of the population across the industrialized world, contributes to about 45% of greenhouse gas emissions, and yet they have the highest potential for emission reduction, whereas the poorest half emit 15% of emissions and are unfairly bearing the cost of environmental destructions. Further warming is inevitably occurring, closely coupled with climate and economic risks. The Global South will become more vulnerable to inequality, economic insecurity, food shortages, reduced water security, and malnutrition. The problems we face are large and urgent. If temperatures are to remain safe, the global economy must decarbonize and reach net zero emissions by 2050. To combat climate change, we will need to scale up decarbonization, as well as make significant changes for clean and justice-centered economic growth. Timor-Leste, an island state, is at the heart of the Wallace ecosystem, which contains some of the world's most biodiverse ecosystems. Through the practice of Tara Bandu, Timor-Leste ensures the integrity and protection of its environment, making conservation and the sustainable use of natural resources a societal commitment. Despite protecting our marine biodiversity, coral reefs, and mangrove forests, we are frequently hit by extreme weather events and rising ocean temperatures. Recent tropical cyclones destroyed lives, 6,000 people were displaced, and over $300 million were lost in public infrastructures. If we do not refrain from continuing on the path of unrelenting economic growth, which accelerates global warming, then we will fail to achieve the 1.5 degrees Celsius target. Insufficient political will persists, and responses are not preserving the environmental commons. I believe we may be able to maintain life and prevent reaching 1.5 degrees Celsius in the near future. Scaling up a sustainability transition with ambitious commitments across key industries and high-income countries is required for change that matters. To avert an irreversible planetary emergency requires achieving prosperity with less environmental depletion. It involves accelerating global action for investing in renewables, conservation, and for the development of green and clean growth. We propose moving toward deeper decarbonization with more ambitious climate action from multinational cooperation and defining how to activate the emissions responsibility. The Paris Agreement expects low carbon emissions in a manner where developed countries take the lead. Both the North and the South must commit to technology transfer, capacity building, greater climate financing, and accountability.
Our path to growth must balance equitable and effective conservation, protection, and restoration of nature. Efforts should focus on 60% of the world's biosphere reserves that are in poor countries. The rich nations made the promise to deliver 100 billion to developing countries each year. It is economically and morally right to deliver by 2023. And more than 100 billion must be raised and disbursed each year after that. They must provide plans for loss and damage finance. We stand at the brink. There is the danger of pushing developing countries into collapse. This is a reason to act faster. I invoke my President, His Excellency José Ramos Horta's call for a just energy transition as the policy of deterrence of our time for a global effort to avoid climate conflict and deliver new paths to prosperity. As for our part, I can tell you today that the government of Timor-Leste has enabled stronger steps in our new 2030 goals. We introduce a nature-positive integrated approach to adaptation, mitigation, and economic development. Our government legislated a biodiversity conservation law to scale up our actions to fill the adaptation gap. To best reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, we have developed a blue economy finance roadmap to unlock new sources for the SDGs and sustainable use of ocean resources. To protect biodiversity as a strategy, our President has offered to leave our vast oil and gas reserves under the seabed. We look forward towards global financial contributions to this initiative. Finally, the time has come for climate justice, energy justice, water justice, and food justice with common and differentiated responsibility between the global north and the global south. In the global south, Timor-Leste and the Pacific small island developing states have established an adaptation alliance to take regional actions in order to build resilience. We therefore call for global support. Thank you.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. James P.E. Shaw, Minister of Climate Change of New Zealand. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Mr. President, Excellencies, delegates, this 27th Conference of the Parties is being referred to as the Implementation COP. The Executive Secretary of the UNFCCC has invited us at the start of this conference to show evidence of how we have started to implement the decisions that we collectively made in Glasgow this time last year. Under Article 2.1a of the Paris Agreement on Mitigation, since Glasgow, New Zealand has set in law a set of emissions budgets from now until 2035. In order to meet those budgets, we have published our first emissions reduction plan covering every sector of the economy. We have set aside US $3 billion of revenue from our cap and trade scheme to recycle into the transition into a net zero future. Some of that revenue we are co-investing with private enterprise to bring forward large-scale capital investments to decarbonise industry and energy. Some of that revenue we have dedicated to reducing methane and nitrous oxide emissions from the farming sector. We have introduced vehicle emissions incentives and standards. As a result, electric vehicle sales have risen from 1% of all new cars sold 5 years ago to 5% of all new cars sold 1 year ago to now 30% of all new car sales in the last few months. Under Article 2.1b of the Paris Agreement on Adaptation, since Glasgow, we have published our first National Adaptation Plan. This National Adaptation Plan outlines how we will support our communities to become more resilient to the droughts, floods, fires and storms that we are already experiencing as a result of the 1.1 degrees of temperature warming that has already occurred. Under Article 2.1c of the Paris Agreement on Finance, since Glasgow, we have passed a law requiring climate-related financial disclosures from large listed companies and from financial institutions, in line with the recommendations of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. In addition, this morning we announced that we will be issuing our first US $3 billion of sovereign green bonds to support our transition to a net zero future. Mr. President, across the world, the response to climate change must include and support Indigenous people. I arrive at COP27 with work underway to support an Indigenous framework for action that will be led by our Indigenous Māori people, by our Māori people, for Māori people. In addition, beg your pardon. We are running out of time. Before us lies a simple choice. Do we want a world that is defined by the ravages of climate change, or do we want a world that is cleaner, fairer, safer, and more productive than it is today? It seems like a simple choice, and yet we still cling to outdated thinking and practices. We're still clinging to the fossil-fueled world of the past. The latest report shows that our collective commitments only add up to a 2.4-degree world. Go and ask a young person what they think of that choice, what they think about the future that we are preparing for them. And brace yourselves for the answer, because they know, as do we, that a better world is possible. And they know that we have the means and the disposal at our disposal to create it. They know that all we lack is the political ambition and the will to make it happen. Aotearoa New Zealand is committed to bold, enduring action on climate change, because in our region, the Blue Pacific, climate change is an existential challenge. In our region, 1.5 degrees is critical, and the decisions of this COP must reconfirm our commitment to 1.5, to Paris, and to the decisions that we made in Glasgow. As ever, it will be the most vulnerable who will be the worst affected, and we cannot stand by and knowingly let that happen. It is only through our collective action and our shared commitments that we will rise to the challenge and take that opportunity. So let's get to it. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. On behalf of the conference, I would like to thank you all for your statements. Distinguished delegates, we will continue with the delivery of national statements today at 15 hours in this plenary. With this, I declare this joint meeting of the COP, the CMP and CMA adjourned.